Vandegrift and my wonderful assistant client coordinator, Ann, with MCB Realty. Covering today the as-is addendum, which is an important tool in writing a strong offer, especially in this competitive market. This purchase agreement in Indiana is 8 pages. A lot of it's contingency. I know the focus a lot of times for people is price, and of course you want a high price, but you also want conditions and terms that meet your needs, because see, only one line's price on here, and then we get into a lot of conditions like earnest money, which is good faith money. You've got what type of financing, cash, whatnot, time for financing, closing and possession, and then we get to a very important thing on inspections. And you've got 3 different options here. One, you can waive the right to have independent inspections, which is always very dangerous. And as a professional, I'm going to advise not to do this. And the seller cannot, by Indiana law, I believe, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not giving law advice, but I believe you have the right to inspection on property. But you do have the right here to waive it. If you really want to make a good offer, it does make it stronger because they aren't going to worry about an inspection response. Then you've got a second option, which in a typical market is normal, where you reserve the right to have independent inspections. And then you go down here and you put so many days that you have to send from the buyer to the seller an inspection response, asking for repairs. Now, on these repairs, you typically want to try to keep them to where it's a major defect that would affect the value of the home, a safety or a health concern. But sometimes buyers and their agents ask for a lot of stuff. And during an inspection, no matter how nice you think your home is, they're going to find some stuff wrong, little stuff. And it's a negotiation point. And that's why waiving that right, the seller has more confidence if you're not going to send over an inspection response with 50,000 things on it. But you also have another option, which I use quite frequently, and it's the as-is addendum. And what that does is that protects you as a buyer. You reserve the right to an inspection, but you're not going to send a response. And then we go to the as-is addendum. And what the as-is addendum does is it allows you, if you find something that there's a major defect or a deficiency, something that would affect the value of the home that was not previously disclosed, you can still get out of the contract. And it goes through some of those things, like you found mold, radon, presence of pests, things are damaged that weren't assumed to be damaged, by a normal consumer that the inspector found. Foundation problems, roof problems, things like that. Those are going to be major defects, safety and health. And this allows you so many days. You select right over here, buyer shall have. Usually we put 10 or 15 days from the beginning of acceptance of the offer to get the inspection done and get out of the agreement if we want to get out, or proceed with the agreement if the house checks out. Like we just had one this morning where the inspection went through. There was nothing, walk away. There were a few maintenance and repair items for the future, but nothing that would make the buyer walk away. And then, we're going to post up a blog post on this from a legal Q&A from the Indiana Association of Realtors that covers some common questions on as-is addendums. Now, when you do an as-is addendum, you can't do this as like trickery and try to put in a low offer and say as is, and then come back to the seller during the process and try to ask for repairs. Now, that's breach of this agreement. And that's one of the significance of this. This was added to make your offer stronger and not worry the seller. The seller's confident you're not going to ask for a bunch of things. And one of the questions commonly asked is, when you do an as-is, do you have the right to inspection? Yes, absolutely. You have the right to do an inspection with a licensed home inspector. Due to consumer protection laws, a buyer cannot be forced to buy a property without the opportunity for an inspection. However, with the as-is addendum, the buyer has a limited time frame to have an inspection completed and elect to terminate the contract if a previously undisclosed defect is identified by the inspection, which is why that days on this is important. on that addendum. When a buyer submits an as-is addendum, they're pretty much telling the seller they will not ask for the seller to do any repairs. So as a result of that, the seller is considering that in the negotiated price, the price you offer. Like we just had an instance today where I talked to the buyer and there were some FHA required repairs. Well, they have to be done for the loan to go through. The buyer's FHA and the seller had an as is, and the seller was very adamant about the fact that it was as is. They're not doing any repairs. They took that offer for that price because of that fact. So the buyer is actually paying to do those FHA required repairs because it's technically, if the buyer would have asked the seller, it would have been a breach of that agreement. So it pretty much make this null and void, and then it would be an argument over who gets the earnest money back. Because with this as is, if you find something in the inspection, the buyer is refunded their earnest money. Whereas if it comes up like an FHA required repairs, the seller's not required to repair those, and the seller, technically, in my mind, should keep that earnest money. Now, that's going to be a debate between your buyer and seller when you're doing a mutual release from the agreement. So, now this also asks, does the inspection have to reveal a defect, or can the buyer walk away for any reason? Pursuant to this as-is addendum, the inspection must reveal a previously undisclosed defect. It is very clear that the buyer has two options after having an inspection that reveals a defect. Either they can terminate within the time period or proceed towards closing if they wish to. Because sometimes you'll find something that may be a defect, but it's not a big enough defect for you to walk away from the house, and you still want the house, whereas it's something you can take care of later. The difference, and this asks a good question too. What if the buyer wants to request a repair after the inspection, but the parties have agreed to the purchase the property as is? The difference between the purchase agreement inspection language and the as is addendum language is that the buyer will not ask the seller to make any repairs. If the property is bought as is, there are no instructions as to how to proceed with inspection responses, as that language is not applicable when purchasing as is. There are no such instructions in the as-is addendum on how to proceed with inspection responses, since it was not intended to operate in that manner. So that's why we had to, on an FHA, we had to discuss how that was going to get taken care of, because those things had to be taken care of for the loan to proceed. So we did work that out, and I had to be very firm with the other side that with an as-is addendum, we cannot legally, we're breaching that as-is addendum if we ask the seller. So it's one of those tricky situations, and there's a lot of negotiation in real estate. But this is a great tool to use to make your offer stronger. So, Ann, as you know little about this, do you have any questions you can think of that buyers might have on this?
No, but I can revisit this one in case I have any questions. So you
Okay,
have
great.
okay, yeah.
Yep. So, all right. Yeah. And remember, if anybody has any real estate questions, needs, or anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help you out, and everybody have a great day. And now you can stop the recording.